My fiance's work supervisor got drunk and accidentally disclosed that he used company funds as a deposit for a property with his office affair partner rather than covering our household expenses, so I took instant revenge. Be me, 32-year-old Olivia Wilson, elementary school art teacher in suburban Boston, spent the last decade helping third graders discover their inner Picasso, also trying to keep them from eating the non-toxic paint. But that's not where this story starts. This story starts with my husband Thomas, a spreadsheet-loving numbers guy. Somehow managed to turn my perfectly organized life into absolute chaos. Thomas and I met 7 years ago at a friend's New Year's Eve party. He was the guy who brought homemade salsa, could actually explain what was happening during the countdown. At 34, he was established in his career as a risk management consultant, worked at Blackwell Financial Group, one of those gleaming downtown firms. Everyone wears suits that cost more than my monthly salary. He had this dorky way of explaining complex financial stuff using Marvel references. I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. We got married 3 years ago. Pinterest-worthy backyard wedding, complete with mason jar centerpieces and fairy lights. First year of marriage was straight out of a romantic comedy. Weekend brunches, surprise date nights, plans for our future dream home. We'd been saving like crazy, living in our modest 2-bedroom apartment, driving our sensible used cars, brown bagging our lunches. The dream was to buy a house in Brookline, one of those beautiful old Victorian homes with a wraparound porch, where we could raise our future kids. Then came Natalie Brooks, Thomas's new work wife, as everyone at his office jokingly called her, a 27-year-old finance prodigy with perfect hair and a Yale MBA, started at Blackwell Financial about a year ago. Met her at the company Christmas party. She laughed a little too hard at Thomas's terrible dad jokes, touched his arm way too many times for my comfort. But I trusted Thomas completely, or at least I thought I did. My best friend Diane works as a paralegal in the same building as Thomas's firm. She'd occasionally mention seeing Thomas and Natalie getting coffee together, or having lunch in the building's cafe. They're just colleagues, I'd tell myself. Even as that knot in my stomach grew tighter, Diane would give me these looks, like she wanted to say more but couldn't quite bring herself to do it. Meanwhile, our house fund seemed to be growing slower than expected. Thomas started talking about market downturns and unexpected expenses, always with a slightly nervous edge to his voice. I now realize that should have been my first real warning sign. He'd get these mysterious phone calls. He'd take them in another room. His late nights at the office became more frequent. But here's where it gets interesting. There's Greg Peterson, the office drunk at Blackwell Financial. Every workplace has one, right? The guy who somehow kept his job despite showing up hungover half the time, saying inappropriate things at every office function. Greg had been with the firm for 20 years, seemed to know everyone's secrets. I'd met him a few times at company events. He'd always give Thomas these weird knowing looks that I couldn't quite decode. Last month, everything changed. During the firm's annual spring mixer at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, I almost didn't go. I had a massive pile of art projects to grade. Was behind on planning the school's art fair, but Diane insisted. Said she had a feeling something interesting might happen. Oh, if she only knew just how interesting things would get. I remember standing there in my new green dress, watching Thomas and Natalie huddled together near the bar, probably discussing some fascinating financial report, or whatever it was they always claimed to be working on. I was about to head over and join them, when Greg Peterson stumbled up to me, his tie askew and his glass of whiskey dangerously close to spilling. "Mrs. Wilson," he slurred, "you look lovely tonight. Almost as lovely as that house on Oakwood Street." I had no idea what he was talking about, but something in his tone made my teacher's intuition start screaming. The same intuition that tells me when a kid is about to have a meltdown. Little did I know that conversation with drunk Greg was about to unravel my entire life, set in motion a series of events that would make even the most dramatic reality TV show look tame in comparison. Greg's words about the house on Oakwood Street kept nagging at me all evening. I watched him weave through the crowd, occasionally stopping to chat with other guests, all while maintaining that knowing smirk. Something was off, and my curiosity was getting the better of me. Taking advantage of Thomas being distracted, He was in what looked like a very intense conversation with Natalie about some spreadsheet on her phone. I followed Greg to the hotel's outdoor terrace. He was alone, staring out at the Boston skyline, while nursing what had to be his 10th drink of the night. "Greg," I said, trying to sound casual, "what did you mean about a house on Oakwood Street?" He turned to me with that glazed look drunk people get when they're trying really hard to focus. "Oh, Mrs. Wilson, Olivia, you really don't know, do you?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Your husband and his precious Natalie, they think they're so clever. But you know what's funny about working in the mortgage division? You see everything." My heart started racing. "What exactly do you see, Greg?" "Paperwork," he slurred, leaning in conspiratorially. "Lots and lots of paperwork, like mortgage applications, joint mortgage applications." He emphasized the word joint like it was the punchline to a joke I wasn't getting. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though a part of me was already connecting the dots. 1847 Oakwood Street, Greg said, pulling out his phone, clumsily pulling up a real estate listing. "Beautiful Victorian, 4 bedrooms, original hardwood floors. Bought 3 months ago by one Thomas Wilson and one Natalie Brooks." He hiccuped. "Joint owners, isn't that interesting?" I felt like someone had just dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. The house in the photo was exactly the kind of place Thomas and I had been dreaming about. Wraparound porch and all. I grabbed Greg's phone, my hand shaking as I scrolled through the listing photos. The price tag, $875,000. That's impossible," I stammered. "We've been saving for a house together." "He couldn't." "Oh, but he could," Greg interrupted, taking another sip of his drink. "Your husband's been very creative with his finances. Did you know Natalie's father owns half of Blackwell Financial? She got Thomas promoted to senior consultant last month. Double the salary, nice big bonus. Perfect timing for a down payment, wouldn't you say?" I must have swayed a bit, because Greg actually reached out to steady me. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask. He shrugged, suddenly looking more sober. "Because 20 years ago, my wife found out about my girlfriend the hard way, lost everything in the divorce. Maybe I'm trying to balance my karma." He paused, then added, "Also, Natalie's been making my life hell since she started. She's threatening to force me into early retirement. Thinks I'm a liability." He laughed darkly. "Well, look who's the liability now." Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Diane. "Where are you? Thomas is looking for you, says you're not answering his texts." I looked at my phone. 5 unread texts from Thomas. I'd been so focused on my conversation with Greg that I hadn't noticed them. But what really caught my eye was an email notification that had just popped up. "Thank you for your interest in 1847 Oakwood Street. Your showing is confirmed for tomorrow at 2 p.m. I looked at Greg in confusion. He grinned and held up his phone. "Did I mention I just used your email to schedule a viewing? The realtor showing the guest house apartment might be very interested. To meet the wife of one of the owners." He winked. "Oops." At that moment, I heard Thomas's voice calling my name from inside. Greg quickly slipped something into my hand. A USB drive. Property records, bank statements, emails. Natalie really should change her laptop password. And she definitely shouldn't leave it unattended during lunch breaks. As Thomas's voice got closer, Greg straightened his tie and headed for the door, but not before turning back to add one final bombshell. "Oh, and you might want to check the home insurance policy. They listed themselves as married. That's fraud, by the way. A felony in Massachusetts." He gave me a mock salute and disappeared inside, leaving me standing there with a USB drive in my hand, and my entire world crumbling around me. But what happened next would make this revelation look like a minor plot twist in comparison. Because what Greg didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had an ace up my sleeve, and I was about to play it, in a way that would make Natalie wish she'd never heard the name Wilson. What most people don't know about elementary school art teachers is that we're masters of strategy. Try managing 25 sugar-hyped third graders with scissors and glue, while maintaining order and preventing total chaos. You'll learn a thing or two about tactical thinking. I didn't confront Thomas that night at the mixer. Instead, I pulled myself together, went back inside and played the perfect wife role. I laughed at his jokes, stood by his side, even managed to give Natalie a convincing smile. When she accidentally spilled her red wine on my new green dress, "Oh, I'm so sorry," she'd exclaimed, not looking sorry at all. "Let me help you clean that up." Little did she know that wine stain was the least of her problems. The next morning, I called in sick to school, the first time I'd done so in 3 years. As soon as Thomas left for work with a packed lunch I had lovingly prepared, I plugged in Greg's USB drive. What I found made me glad I was sitting down. There weren't just property records and bank statements. There were emails, hundreds of them. The earliest ones were innocent enough. Work projects, lunch plans, inside jokes about their colleagues. But they quickly evolved into something else. They'd been planning this for months. The house on Oakwood Street wasn't just a real estate investment. It was their dream home, their future together. But here's where it gets interesting. Remember how I mentioned Natalie's father owned half of Blackwell Financial? Well, buried in those emails was evidence of something much bigger. Natalie and Thomas hadn't just committed insurance fraud. They'd been cooking the books at work. They created a clever little scheme to siphon money from client accounts into their own private investments. Small amounts spread across hundreds of accounts, adding up to a tidy sum that had helped fund their house purchase. At 1:55 p.m., I pulled up to 1847 Oakwood Street in my sensible Honda Civic. The realtor, Linda Matthews, was already waiting to show me the guesthouse apartment above the detached garage. She was a chatty woman in her 50s, who lit up when I introduced myself. "Oh, you must be interested in renting. The owners are looking for a tenant." Such a lovely young couple. They just bought the place 3 months ago. "Have you met them?" "Actually," I said, smiling sweetly, "I'm Olivia Wilson, Thomas Wilson's wife." The color drained from Linda's face. "Wife? But Mrs. Brooks, they said they were married." "Mrs. Brooks?" I echoed, pulling out my phone and showing her my marriage certificate, which I thoughtfully photographed that morning. "That's interesting. Would you mind telling me more about that?" Over the next hour, Linda spilled everything. Apparently, Thomas and Natalie had presented themselves as newlyweds when buying the house. They even hosted a small dinner party for the neighbors last month. The previous owners had given them a break on the price because they were such a sweet young couple just starting their life together. But here's where my art teacher skills really came in handy. You see, every year I organize our school's biggest fundraiser, the annual fair. It's taught me everything about documentation, paper trails, and most importantly, who to call when you need things done officially. By 5 p.m. I had 1. A signed affidavit from Linda about the fraudulent marriage claim. 2. Copies of all the property documents. 3. A meeting scheduled with my lawyer for the next morning. 4. And most importantly, a plan. What I didn't know was that Natalie had her own surprise in store that evening. As I sat in our apartment reviewing the evidence, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Back off, Olivia. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Some art teachers should stick to finger painting." Oh, Natalie, if only you knew who you were really dealing with. Because what was about to happen next would make her realize that she just made the biggest mistake of her life, and it would cost her everything. Remember how I mentioned I organized the school's art fair? Well, what I didn't mention was that one of my most dedicated parent volunteers was Victoria Patel, a senior investigator with the SEC. Her twins were in my art class. We'd become friendly over the years of her helping me mount third-grade masterpieces on display boards. The morning after receiving Natalie's threat, I met Victoria for coffee before school. I hadn't slept much, spending most of the night organizing the contents of Greg's USB drive. When I showed Victoria the evidence of the financial fraud, her professional demeanor slipped for just a moment. "Olivia," she said slowly, "this isn't just corporate theft. This is a major securities fraud case. They've been manipulating client accounts across state lines. That makes it federal." But what happened next was something even I hadn't anticipated. Victoria pulled out her own laptop and logged into a secure database. "We've been investigating Blackwell Financial for months," she revealed. "There's been a pattern of irregularities, but we haven't been able to pinpoint the source. Your husband and Natalie Brooks just became our missing link." Meanwhile, Thomas was acting increasingly strange at home. He'd started taking calls in his car, and I caught him frantically shredding documents in his home office late at night. When I asked him about house hunting, just casually over dinner, he launched into a lengthy explanation about market conditions and how we needed to wait another year. "That's funny," I said, keeping my voice light. "I heard the Victorian market in Brookline is quite active right now, especially on Oakwood Street." He choked on his wine but covered it smoothly. "Oh, I hadn't noticed." The next day, I had another surprise visitor at school. Natalie Brooks herself showed up during my lunch break, looking like she'd stepped out of a corporate fashion magazine. My classroom aide's eyes nearly popped out of her head when this perfectly coiffed woman clicked across the art room in her Louboutin. "Mrs. Wilson," Natalie said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We need to talk." I gestured to the tiny chairs at the kids' art table. "Have a seat, Natalie. Watch out for the glitter, it never really comes off." She remained standing, looking at the child-sized furniture with disdain. "I know you've been asking questions about the house. You need to stop." "Or what?" I asked, deliberately squeezing some blue paint onto a palette. "You'll tell my husband, or should I say your husband?" I looked up at her innocently. The paperwork is a bit confusing on that point. Her perfectly composed face flickered for just a moment. "This is bigger than you understand. Thomas and I were protecting significant interests. People who don't appreciate interference. People like your father," I suggested, starting to paint casual strokes on a piece of paper. "The one who owns half of Blackwell Financial. I wonder what he'd think about the creative accounting you and Thomas have been doing." She blanched. "How did you, those are serious accusations," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You don't have any proof." I smiled, continuing to paint. "Don't I? It's amazing what people leave on their laptops. By the way, using your cat's name as a password? Not very secure." She took a step forward, her designer heel landing in a stray blob of yellow paint. "Listen, you little—" But she was interrupted by a knock at the classroom door. Victoria Patel stood there, flanked by two men in suits. "Natalie Brooks," one of them said, holding up a badge. "We're with the FBI. We'd like to ask you some questions about certain financial irregularities at Blackwell Financial." The look on Natalie's face was better than any revenge I could have planned. But what happened next would make this moment look like a minor victory. Because while Natalie was being escorted out of my classroom, Thomas was making a desperate move that would change everything, and not in the way anyone expected. While Natalie was having her uncomfortable chat with the FBI, Thomas was making a panic-induced decision that would spectacularly backfire. I didn't know it at the time, but he had received a text from Natalie's assistant, warning him about the FBI's arrival at my school. His response, pure chaos. Instead of coming clean or turning himself in, Thomas decided to go full movie villain. He rushed to the bank, withdrew every penny from our joint accounts, including my teacher's pension fund that I trustingly added him to, and headed straight to 1847 Oakwood Street. His plan, as I later learned from security camera footage, was to grab important documents from the house and make a run for it. What he didn't expect was to find Greg Peterson waiting in the driveway. Remember Greg, our friendly neighborhood drunk? Turns out he wasn't as drunk as everyone thought. For the past year, he'd been building his own case against Natalie and her father, methodically documenting every suspicious transaction. The whole drunken confessor act. Pure performance art. "Going somewhere, Thomas?" Greg had asked, blocking the garage entrance. "Because I just got off the phone with the FBI, and they're very interested in those documents you're about to grab." According to the neighbors who later gave statements, what happened next was like something out of a bad action movie. Thomas tried to shove past Greg, but our supposedly uncoordinated office drunk turned out to have a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Who knew? While they were scuffling on the perfectly manicured lawn, another player entered the scene. Natalie's father, Robert Brooks himself. He'd arrived in his Mercedes, presumably to handle damage control, only to find his star employee rolling around in the grass with the office drunk. But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember those emails on Greg's USB drive? Turns out they weren't just about Thomas and Natalie's affair, or their financial fraud. Hidden in their correspondence was evidence that Robert Brooks had been running a massive Ponzi scheme for years. Thomas and Natalie's little embezzlement scheme was just the tip of the iceberg. I learned all this later from Diane, who had front row seats to the chaos from her office window across the street. She'd been recording everything on her phone, a video that would later become key evidence in the federal investigation. Meanwhile, I was still in my classroom, cleaning up from the FBI's interruption of Natalie's threatening visit, when I received a series of increasingly frantic texts from Thomas. "Olivia, I can explain everything. Please don't look at the bank accounts. This isn't what it looks like. Natalie means nothing to me. I did it for us. And my personal favorite. Can you bail me out?" Because yes, my husband had managed to get himself arrested, not just for the financial fraud, but for assaulting Greg, failed attempt at destroying evidence, those documents he was after, and ironically, trespassing. Apparently, in his rush to buy the house with Natalie, he'd failed to notice that her name was listed first on the deed. Legally, he needed her permission to enter the property. But the real bombshell was still to come. While Thomas was sitting in a holding cell, and Natalie was being interrogated by the FBI, I received an unexpected call from Robert Brooks's wife, Eleanor, and what she had to tell me would turn this whole situation on its head. Because the money Thomas and Natalie had stolen, it wasn't just sitting in that house on Oakwood Street. They'd been planning something much bigger, something that would make their current legal troubles look like a parking ticket. And somehow, I had just become the key to unraveling it all. Eleanor Brooks wasn't at all what I expected. When we met at a discreet coffee shop in Newton, I found myself facing not the polished socialite I'd imagined, but a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, with a stack of folders and a laptop. "You're probably wondering why I reached out," she said, stirring her untouched coffee. "The truth is, I've been waiting for this house of cards to collapse for years. Your husband and my stepdaughter just happened to be the loose threads that finally unraveled it." Turns out Eleanor wasn't just Robert Brooks's trophy wife. She was a former forensic accountant who'd spent the last 5 years secretly documenting her husband's criminal enterprise. The Oakwood Street house wasn't just a love nest for Thomas and Natalie. It was meant to be a staging ground for something much bigger. They were planning to use it as collateral for a series of loans, Eleanor explained. Sliding documents across the table, the house, the fraudulent marriage, the stolen client funds. It was all meant to establish a legitimate-looking financial history. They needed it for the next phase. The next phase, as she explained, was a massive real estate scheme involving properties across 3 states. Robert Brooks had been working with corrupt city officials to get insider information about upcoming development projects. The plan was to buy up land cheap, manipulate zoning laws, and sell it for massive profits to developers. Thomas and Natalie's dream home was supposed to be their ticket into this bigger operation. But here's what Natalie doesn't know, Eleanor continued, lowering her voice. Robert's been setting her up to take the fall. He's got offshore accounts in her name that she doesn't even know about. When the FBI starts digging deeper, all roads will lead to her. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Eleanor smiled grimly. "Because I've spent 15 years watching Robert destroy people's lives. Natalie may be complicit, but she's still my stepdaughter. And your husband? He's just another pawn in Robert's game. I want to take Robert down, but not at the cost of letting him sacrifice everyone else to save himself." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking. Blackwell Financial under federal investigation. CEO Robert Brooks unavailable for comment. But what really caught my attention was the next message. An email from Natalie herself. "We need to talk. Not about Thomas, not about the house, about my father. I know what he's done and I have proof, but I need your help." I looked up at Eleanor, who was watching me carefully. "She's reached out, hasn't she?" she asked. "Good. That means she's found the documents I planted in her office." "You planted?" "Let's just say I've been playing a very long game," Eleanor replied, closing her laptop. "The question is, are you willing to play the final round? Because what happens next could either bring down Robert's entire operation or make you and Natalie his next victims." I thought about my cleaned-out bank accounts, my shattered marriage, my reputation at school. I thought about Thomas sitting in a jail cell, and Natalie probably sitting in an FBI interrogation room. And then I thought about all the people Robert Brooks had hurt over the years. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Eleanor's smile was downright predatory. First, we need to talk about what's really hidden in that house on Oakwood Street. Because the FBI search team, they haven't found the safe room yet, and that's when I realized my revenge against Thomas and Natalie was about to become part of something much bigger, something that would make headlines across the country and bring down one of Boston's most powerful financial empires. But first, I had a very interesting meeting to arrange with my husband's mistress. Meeting your husband's mistress in the house she bought with him is weird enough. Meeting her there to take down her corrupt father while FBI agents secretly listen in? That's a whole new level of surreal. Natalie arrived at 1847 Oakwood Street, looking nothing like the polished executive I'd last seen in my classroom. Her designer outfit had been replaced by jeans and a sweater. Her perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her eyes had the haunted look of the safe rooms behind the wine cellar, she said without preamble. Dad installed it himself. That's where he keeps everything. Documents, hard drives, account numbers. Enough evidence to put him away for decades. Why are you doing this? I asked. Why turn on him now? She laughed bitterly. Because I finally found out what happened to my mother. She didn't leave us when I was a kid like he always claimed. She found out about his schemes back then, threatened to expose him. She disappeared the next day. Eleanor showed me the proof. The FBI team moved in silently, following Natalie's directions to the hidden room. What they found inside was beyond anyone's expectations. Detailed records of 20 years of financial crimes, including evidence of Robert's involvement in Natalie's mother's disappearance. But the real surprise came when they opened a second hidden compartment and found Thomas's passport, $50,000 in cash, and plane tickets to the Cayman Islands, dated for the day after our anniversary trip was supposed to end. He was never planning to come back from that trip with you, Natalie said quietly. The plan was to meet me there, access the accounts we set up, and disappear. I'm sorry, Olivia, I really am. The aftermath was like watching dominoes fall. Robert Brooks was arrested trying to board his private jet. The FBI found Natalie's mother's remains exactly where Eleanor's evidence suggested they'd be. Blackwell Financial was placed under federal oversight, and dozens of corrupt officials were indicted. Thomas, facing multiple federal charges, tried to cut a deal by revealing everything he knew. But thanks to Eleanor's meticulous documentation and Natalie's cooperation, they didn't need him. He's now serving 15 years in federal prison. Natalie testified against her father and received a reduced sentence, 5 years plus restitution. The last time I saw her was at the sentencing hearing. She looked at me and mouthed, "Thank you," before they led her away. Greg Peterson? He wasn't just reinstated at Blackwell Financial. He's now heading their new compliance department. Turns out all those years of playing the office drunk while gathering evidence made him uniquely qualified to spot financial fraud. As for me, well, remember those art fair organizational skills I mentioned? The FBI's Financial Crimes Division was pretty impressed with how I helped coordinate their investigation. They offered me a job as a civilian analyst, specializing in documentation and evidence organization. Turns out elementary school art teachers are pretty good at spotting patterns and putting pieces together. The house on Oakwood Street was seized by the federal government and sold at auction. I used my portion of the whistleblower reward to buy my own place, a cozy bungalow in Brookline, just a few blocks away. Sometimes I drive past 1847 Oakwood Street and see the new family living there, completely unaware of all the drama those walls witnessed. Eleanor Brooks retired to Florida, but she still sends me Christmas cards. Her latest one included a photo of her on the beach and a note that said, "Sometimes the best revenge is letting people destroy themselves." While you document everything, I've started dating again recently. He's a high school chemistry teacher who thinks my FBI consultant job is fascinating. On our third date, I took him to see my new house. As we sat on my porch swing, yes, I got my wraparound porch after all, he asked me what made me switch careers from art teacher to financial crimes analyst. I just smiled and said, "Let's just say I learned the hard way that revenge is an art form all its own. And you know what? I think I've mastered it."